Cuphead is a shoot-'em-up platformer with a 1930s animation-era art style that focuses on big multi-stage boss battles intercut with short but challenging side-scrolling action stages. The game was first announced during the Xbox press conference during E3 2014 and had a slightly different look to the final product. In fact, many aspects of Cuphead changed during its long development period. One of the biggest changes that occurred to Cuphead over its 6-year development were alterations and cuts made to the game's main focal point, the bosses themselves, with many bosses created and even shown in trailers that never made it to the final release. In this video we take a look at Cuphead's cut content, the version of the game we never got to play. While the game was officially shown to the public during 2014, there did previously exist a short proof-of-concept trailer made by developer studio MDHR, which showcased a boss fight that never made it into the final release. This boss is similar in appearance to Goopy Legrand, however the fight plays out differently, with two versions of Goopy and a completely different background. Also notice how, in this original version of Cuphead, the world map looks slightly different. As well as the tutorial screen, which was, at the time, set in a boxing gym. Another noticeable visual change can be seen with the screen itself. Originally it was made up of hundreds of small lines in order to mirror the look of old CRT television sets. This was done away with in favour of a film grain effect in the version we got to play at launch. Next, let's turn our attention to a boss who never made it into Cuphead in any form whatsoever. This airborne boss slightly resembles the devil himself if we look at his facial features. In fact, this boss was known as the Demon Bat, and was apparently supposed to be the enemy Cuphead had to face before the devil in the final game, but for some reason it was cut. The bat appears from a coffin, and this coffin would open to release smaller bats, who would then swarm Cuphead during the fight. There is very little actual footage of the Demon Bat, but he can be seen in an early trailer for the game from 2014. It seems due to his appearance that this boss was based, at least in part, on Count Dracula. Jelly the Octopus was to be part of an entire group of stages that were completely removed from the final version of Cuphead. These stages were based within and around an airship, and there was even music written for these stages. This music was discovered within the game's code and simply called the airship. Here's a short clip of that theme. But who was Jelly the Octopus, and how would he have played out? Well, obviously Jelly is an octopus, and one based on cartoon versions of this creature from the classic era of animation, such as the octopus seen here in the animation short Frolicking Fish from 1930. In the game he can be seen here in this off-screen footage, which was captured during development. Notice how Cuphead must use his parry ability in order to attack the boss, and each time Jelly is slapped, he becomes harder to dodge as his attack speed increases. It seems this early boss was built to get the player used to parrying successfully and reacting quickly. But for whatever reason, both this boss and the airship environment were never used. Viewers with arachnophobia will no doubt be happy this spider-looking guy was removed from Cuphead's final release. Although he has 6 legs rather than 8, so perhaps he is not intended to resemble a spider completely. Known simply as the Flying Gentleman, this creepy-looking boss was intended to be fought in the sky using Cuphead's plane, much in the same way as bosses such as Hilda Berg and Carla Maria. It is not clear what kind of attack patterns the giant spider would have had, as we do not have any footage of him in action. Only a single image of his character model, which was featured in a book called Game On 2018, where the developer was quoted saying, "Cuphead isn't limited to fighting on the ground. One of the larger-than-life bosses, such as this dapper gentleman with a vicious tongue, can only be tackled in the skies." It remains unknown why this smartly dressed spider was cut from the final game, but perhaps he will show up in future DLC, or a sequel if it ever happens. Okay, so this next boss battle can be found in the debug mode of the game when hacked, and was part of some unused code that was never completed. We don't get to see what the actual boss, known only as the Light, would look like, as its art and animations were never implemented, but we can see mechanically how it would have worked. This boss was to take place in the casino area toward the end of Cuphead's campaign, taking place in the All Bets Are Off level, and as the name suggests, it was likely intended to be a neon sign at the casino that fired out light rays Cuphead had to avoid. The placeholder art for the boss at the centre of the screen appears to be a small green creature with a tiny top hat. 6 blue light beams emanate from within this character, and Cuphead has to avoid them as projectiles are fired at him. These projectiles were placeholder 2 and actually little heads of one of the game's creators, Jared Moldenheur. So, a highly unfinished boss visually, but one which can be experienced via hacks in its entirety, gameplay-wise. Next, we have a mini-boss known as Betty Beet. This character was a beetroot who was part of the Root Pack boss battle. Her name an obvious play on popular Fleischer Brothers character from that era of animation, Betty Boop. In fact, a look at Betty Beep's concept art shows striking facial similarities between these two characters also. There is no footage of Betty, however if we look to her artwork we can see it appears she would have thrown little bouncing beetroots at the player. It is likely this character was adapted into Weepy, who did appear in the final game, as they seem to have a similar shape and attack pattern. Finally, we come to one of the most complete of these cut bosses on this list, and in fact this boss can be accessed in the game's debug mode if you're savvy with your hacking skills. This boss is known as Patchy Patchy, and is based on the Japanese gambling sensation, the pachinko machine. Patchy Patchy was to show up as one of the mini battles during King Dice's fight. He would have appeared alongside other characters on the board game Spaces. During this battle, players must avoid Patchy as he speeds back and forth, blasting out fireballs from his head and dropping balls from the top of the arena. Upon defeating this boss, his eyeball pops out of its socket and he rocks back and forth. It's actually pretty creepy. It is not known why exactly this boss was cut, but it is assumed to be because the Japanese pachinko machines were not actually in keeping with the 1930s time period Cuphead was based around. Instead, these gambling devices were only available outside of Japan during the 1970s onwards. It may also have been because the developers had already designed a bunch of other mini-bosses for King Dice's board they were simply happier using. And that brings us to the end of this look at the cut content from early versions of Cuphead. It is also worth noting that existing bosses and cutscenes changed quite drastically from the original trailers upon the game's launch. But perhaps you know of some other changes that I haven't mentioned in this video, so let me know what you think in the comments section below. And that's it for today's video. Please remember to give it a like if you did enjoy watching, and maybe drop a comment too, as well as subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications so you never miss an upload. This channel specializes in variety horror content, including creepypasta readings, horror gaming facts and theories, and general interest pop culture horror videos. So if you're interested in all things spooky, you'll find something to enjoy here at Super Horror Bro. Thanks for watching, and I will see you on the next video.